Well, good day, everybody. Pastor Kevin here, bringing you this week's group curriculum guidance. We're on session 4 in our Acts series for this session, and we're going to jump in the questions on page 27. Question number 1. Question number 1 is actually a repeat from last week. I think I was probably determining where it should go in the last week or this week, and I didn't decide. So you guys can decide if you want to go over that question again, but it is kind of a repeat from the previous week. Question number 2, read Luke 13:22 through 30. Compare the use of gnashing or grinding of teeth in Luke and in Acts 7:54. What is the cause of the gnashing in each? How might Luke be connecting the beginning and end of Stephen's story? Explain. So Jesus uses this term gnashing of teeth, and he uses it not just in Luke and in a few different places. And you'll know that it's generally not a good thing, and it's usually done by people who have rebelled or done evil or haven't done the right thing. Question number 3, compare Acts 6:15 and 7:55. How might these be connected? What is common to both situations? This whole idea of capturing the gaze. So in the previous situation, when they gazed at Stephen, they saw like the face like an angel. And now it says, where's Stephen's gaze focused? Upward, right, into heaven. And so we talked last week about how the very presence, somehow this idea of kind of having a face of an angel is this declaration that the presence of God has somehow touched Stephen, much like Moses when Yahweh revealed himself to him and those type of things. So you have this idea of, well, where is the gaze supposed to be set, right? Stephen is looking up into heaven, and everyone else's gaze is towards Stephen. Stephen gave his whole speech, right? They're focused on the one with a face like an angel. And at the end of it, they're not happy. They're enraged. And I would suggest part of this is their gaze is not focused in the right direction, nor do they see the presence of the living God who's on this person who's speaking the truth to them with their own scriptures. Question number 4, read Mark 14:55 through 65. The words of Stephen are close to Jesus' own words in the gospel accounts. In Acts 7:56, what is different? What reaction do these words prompt in both situations? I think you can tell the reaction is the same, but I want you to dig and see some of those differences. It's clear Jesus' statement is different than Stephen's statement. Stephen is recognizing, he is observing a reality. Jesus is stating what the reality will be. But there is the small difference, and we'll get into it a little bit further, is you see Jesus standing, right? And we're going to get further into that. But talk about how those things match up. Question number 5. Now read Isaiah 3:13 through 15. Psalm 109:30 through 31. Considering Stephen's vision, what might the posture of standing mean in this context? Now, I don't want to be dogmatic about this, but oftentimes when you talk about standing, especially when it's associated to God, there's an idea of judgment. It's standing in judgment, standing ready for action. I feel that fits pretty well right here, and that is kind of the interesting nuance where you have Jesus saying where the Son of Man is going to be, and you have Stephen saying what he sees, and with all that's going on and with the response of the council, it's just it's a powerful image that the one who is the Son of Man, the one whom they have killed, one who they did not trust and see as the Messiah, the one who they weren't paying attention to, who they weren't even paying attention to their own scriptures, is the one standing. So you can kind of talk about the considerations there. Question number 6, read Luke 6:47 through 49 and 10:16. How do these words from Jesus resonate in Acts 7:57? It's actually pretty simple. Looking at these two verses, you can see how important it is where Jesus is saying is, no, you hear, right? You hear what I say, not listen, not stop your ears, right? And then he goes on to say is that, hey, when they're listening to you, right? And there's a prophetic understanding here. And we're going to get further into this by looking at some Old Testament passages, but you can see that this idea of Jesus or Luke, as he's writing his gospel, he's basically calling out how hearing what Jesus actually has to say is super important. And it's not just, there are other places where it's like hearing and putting into action, right? But the key thing here is that what do we see the leaders of Israel doing? They're stopping their ears. They're closing. They don't want to hear it. This is very much an Old Testament resonance, and we'll get to that in a second. Question number 7. When the text says they rushed together, the Greek word for together is the same used for one accord that we have seen in Acts 1:14, Acts 2:46, and Acts 4:24. Being of the same mind cuts both ways. What are some areas in your life where you are of the same mind with others that is not in accord with God's will? It's a good opportunity to ask your group. Maybe it's almost like leading them down a path of understanding some of their own faults, where they may be in one accord with an idea that's not God's, right? It's against God's will, because that's kind of what's happening here. Is they rush together. They're one accord going after Stephen, and I think you and I can get stubborn in a lot of things. So open it up to the group and say, hey, maybe it's like a historic thing. Maybe it's like, where is a place where you saw that you were stubborn toward what God's will was in a particular area, and you were going the opposite way, or you were actually taking you were in one accord with culture against God's stance on particular things, and kind of talk about that and talk about what actually would break that down and those type of things. Question number 8, read Ezekiel 2:3-7 and 3:4-7. Is Ezekiel promised success in his prophetic mission? What is the outcome that he is promised? It's pretty easy here, and it's powerful. The point is that it's such a powerful image as Ezekiel is told, go do this divine work of being the prophet to your people, but they're not going to listen to you. Like, how many of you I could say this about me, is that when you're told, hey, go do this thing, you're not going to be successful at it. Or maybe it's just judging what success truly is. The message is the success. It's giving the message, right? It's almost like the message of the watchtower. It's like the person on the watchtower, if they call out that an enemy is approaching, then they've done their job, right? If they don't, then it is on them, right? So part of this is, man, Ezekiel has taken up this vocational role of prophet that he's not promised a good outcome. In fact, he's promised a negative one. And you have to think about that in view of Stephen's consequence to his doing God's will, his proclamation of Jesus to the people who will stop their ears and rush at him enraged in one accord in order to destroy him. Question number 9. Read the story of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16:19-31. What is ironic about the council's response in Acts 7:57 when we think about Stephen's defense from last week? If you go to the story of rich man and Lazarus, the ending is so poignant because it's basically the rich man is certain that, hey, okay, I know you can't help me, but go to my family, go to my brothers and tell them. And the response is, you know what? They had Moses and the prophets, right? They don't need someone to raise from the dead in order to, they won't listen to someone who's raised from the dead. And it's so, at that point in the gospel, it's a super powerful foreshadowing of what's going to happen. And it actually, using Stephen's situation here, is really powerful as well. Stephen used Moses and the prophets in order to show how wrong and how off base the council was. And yet they're still, they are so stuck in their rebellion, just like that passage from Ezekiel. They're not going to hear. They're not going to change their mind. They're set in their way. They've grabbed a hold of, as Isaac would say, the arrow, and they're not letting it go, rather than the reality to which it points to. And it's such a troubling thing. And it's super important to think about those ways we can get that way, maybe on small things, not necessarily. We just talked about like ways where our will can go against God's, but I think sometimes we get stuck and might be thinking about something in a particular way where we're not letting God inform us about the realities. Question number 10, do you read the story of Stephen and feel unremarkable in your own faith? Explain. What would it mean to have a remarkable faith in your opinion? These are powerful questions that I want you to kind of spend some time on in your group. Because I think all of us feel that way in a sense when we read these stories. I think maybe part of it is because we think that they should be exemplars for what our life is. And in one sense, I think that's true. But I think there's the whole story of Scripture is telling a grander narrative, a grander story about how we really aren't the exemplar Jesus is, right? And it's when normal men and women step up and submit themselves to him, the one who would give everything for us, that actually you see these little glimmers of what a little bit of a more remarkable faith looks like. And this is where I want to get to, is just like, what would it mean? Like, what were things that you'd be thinking of? Like, does it mean, in order for your faith to be remarkable, do you have to go to a foreign country and die for your faith? Is that what makes a remarkable faith? Or is there other things that are behind it? Because I think a remarkable faith is actually goes back to what Stephen was picked for when the 7 were chosen to take care of the widows, right? He was a man of good repute. He was full of wisdom and the Spirit. That's the thing that I think is at the core of a remarkable faith. It is wisdom, being full of the Spirit, and literally that comes out in virtue. It comes out in how we live our lives. We have good reputations, and all of that looks more remarkable. I'm telling you, to the world around us, it looks remarkable. And think about remarkable maybe in a different sense. The idea of remarkable is something worth giving a remark about, worth remembering, worth telling someone about. It doesn't mean that it has to be some absolute, like, again, martyrdom or something like that. I think there are many things that we can do to make our faith more remarkable, and they always have to do with those that are wise, full of Spirit, and from that become have good reputation. We're seen differently than the rest of the world. And that takes us to the carrying the torch section, which is ultimately, I think we should all consider in an application for this week, is you see what Stephen has done. You saw that knowing that outcome was sure, that this wasn't going to go well. And he did it anyway. And I think this makes us think about, well, what are we afraid of? What are the things that get in the way of even like our proclamation in our work or in our home or whatever? What are the things that get in the way of being a person of good repute, right? With wisdom and full of the Spirit? What are the things that stop that from happening? And I think a lot of times it is some level of fear of how I'm going to look, what I'm going to lose, all of those things. And in reality, those are the things we should be just confessing and repenting of together. Is I don't want to be afraid for myself because of some outcome, because there is no outcome that can separate me from the love of Christ. Not even death. Death, where is your sting? We have to remember that as we go through life. And you will likely never get an opportunity to do something that Stephen has, right? You probably won't, and that's okay. That does not make your faith unremarkable. But what we need to do is determine those things that actually stand in the way of us actually living the life out that we were called to live, right? How is it we can be more wise? How is it we can have better reputation? When I say better reputation, not by the world standard, but by God's standard. And chase those things down, small things at a time, and helping each other to do so. So I pray that would be a way you might carry the torch this week. And it takes some effort. It takes some time. You might even need to send your folks home and say, think about what are those things that you fear? And sometimes it starts in this just general area, but I like drill down. Like, what are the things that we want that we feel like we're not going to get? That's almost a perfect example. Or what are the things we think are going to happen that we just don't want? But again, either way, it's about our wants, right? And God's calling us to a different thing, a greater thing. And we see it in Stephen's life in this little mini series that ends today. So take some time to do that. I hope you have a wonderful group this week. May God go with you. May his Spirit reign in the middle of all of your discussions.